Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 38 of my Pyanodon's playthrough. In this episode, we are going to build our upgraded Vrauk setup as well as plan for cDNA. Enjoy. Okay, we've got everything that we need in order to make the second Vrauk expansion, because we're going to make two builds. And since we ended up needing a total of 84, at least for both of them, sap extractors, and I noticed that sap extractors required similar resources to the other two buildings that we put on this line, I just added it on the end so we would have more. That's kind of what I do with belt assembly like this. You know, with bots, you just request whatever you need, but if you're using belts, since Pi buildings use so many different types of items, you just look what items use similar resources and then find a line that has it and just insert it in. So we could build these Vrauks anywhere, but we might as well build it in the same area as everything else here. And we have a few options about how to build it, because we're not actually going to be using it for this recipe at the start. But nonetheless, this is the final stage of the build, so let's just build it based on this, and then we'll modify it for the breeding program. And build-wise, things are going to be a lot different now, because we're going to have long-handed inserters, so all of the resources can actually just go down the middle, and we probably won't need to have stuff going through the sides like this. Additionally, we built these Vrauk paddocks with the barreling machine between the builds when that made this extra long and they could have been on the side, and I think we did this because of a lack of long-handed inserters. But nonetheless, it would actually make sense to put these basically on the sides of buildings like this. And in fact, we could actually put it in the middle and have one barreling machine serving 4 of these instead. So we have some options, but things are different enough that we should probably just build something new from scratch. It is a little annoying having to do it again, but so much is different now compared to how it was that we probably should. Looking about where to build, it's probably going to be a little shorter than this, but a similar size. We would want to put it somewhere around here, and actually we could fit like 2 of them. I'm trying really hard not to go over these patches. It's no big deal if we do, but I would rather not if we can avoid it. And yeah, 2 of them would fit here. So now the spacing of our buildings is going to be a lot different because we can easily have at least 3 belts in the middle. As you've seen before, we can easily get access to 3 belts without doing anything crazy with our 3 inserters, but we can actually do even more than that because we can reach these ones that are really far away with basically like a long inserter and then a second one to move it in. Or we could also go the other direction like this and have like extra helper belts to move items to the far side. So you can do some crazy stuff with long-handed inserters. It's so much more than just they reach 1 square more. But also I mentioned the idea of putting the barreling machine in the middle because we don't really need to put them on the bottom anymore. And if we did it right in the middle like this, we could actually save some space and machines. And I'm all about making builds more compact if they still have the same functionality. But we can have a barreling machine here feeding all 4 sides, and then all of them would also require an output. And we would have some chests there just to move the items. And it would prioritize one chest over the other for the empty barrels, but that doesn't really matter because they're all going to be equally distributed anyway. And because we don't have the modules in here yet, calculating the requirements is going to be a little annoying, but we can put our Mark 1s in there. And if we look at the modules themselves, the Mark 1 has a 100% speed and the Mark 2 is 200%. So we can just multiply the number by 2 to find out what the input requirements are. It looks like I spaced this incorrectly. It's really hard to tell how tall this building is. I'm glad I noticed that now because I probably would have copied it. It just looked asymmetrical. One disadvantage of having this in the middle is just figuring out where to put the pipes. Noting that these arrows are not pass-through arrows, they are directional arrows. So if you put a pipe going in one direction, it will not flow the other. This is only for the emptying of barrels, not for the flow of water. Something like that. And we are actually going to need to have the Mark 1 Vrauks in here to get started, and they'll all get upgraded later. But because this is kind of complicated, we probably want to make sure that everything works. And we need to take into account if there's any spoilage inside the machine. And we can do that with another splitter here and just say, to the right goes the cocoons. Any spoilage that they make will be on this belt here. And the sap could be made anywhere. Let's just put it out here and give it a few spaces. Do we want to mush them a little together? Well, not really, because the power poles don't want to reach. Because these buildings are fairly small, we might get a higher density by smushing them, but they're not that small. The power poles still quite don't reach all the way. So we have 10, we have 20. So how about we do that for 40 and a little bit more for 44. Oop, but I made slightly too many. We can just pull these out. If I remember, these machines are very loud, but making the sap that we need, and the total amount is less than one side of a belt, so we can just side load on here. And another thing we're going to need a ton of is the actual Vrauk food. And I was hesitant to hook it up because it's going to consume a ton of resources, but I think we're pretty backed up now that we've got all of our sodium hydroxide and all of that moss coming all the way back. So we're probably good to fire it up again. The main thing I want to test for here is how much biocrud it creates, because we are getting fairly close to automating the processing of biocrud, but nonetheless, creating less of it is better than creating more. And biocrud is the kind of thing that can really pull back the efficiency of your factory if you're not paying attention to it. And he comes in and picks up the entire stack of 3,000. So then when that happens, our little buffer here is being pulled down. Let's just give it a head start by pulling the items out. And now that it's less than 100, all of the machines are being commanded to turn on. This is a big hulking machine that takes quite some time to fire up, but I would say that's fairly realistic, that most real-world factories are hulking machines that take a very long time to actually turn on in their entirety. That said, this thing's running pretty fast. That the caravan's back already, and he's almost a third full. But yeah, you can see why I wanted to be careful about starting this up, because we're going to have essentially 90 stacks of food in a buffer. So I wanted to make sure that we were ready to put this to the test. And, sigh, I see it now. Some people are probably screaming at the screen, but the amount of Vrauk food that I planned for was 4 per second, but the actual amount that we needed was basically 0.8 per second, or thereabouts. So in other words, this red number here is showing us how much more Vrauk food we're making than we actually need. And of course, all I had to do was click that to have it be balanced. I mean, it's already here and it works, but yeah. This is about 5 times bigger than it needs to be for our planned output. And it's a bit too late to change it. If the build was not big enough, you know, that's a different problem to it's too big. Because if it's too big, it's just taking up space. And we could actually dramatically shrink its size by just cutting down the seaweed and the mushrooms and just push it over here and have these other builds be the same size. But oh well, I mean, it is very frustrating to make that mistake, but Pi is filled with mistakes anyway. The reason why I'm frustrated about it is because this build is so satisfying. That's the thing that's annoying, is that it's so big, but it works. And it's because it works too well that is the depressing part about all of this. So, what does Vrauk food go into? Unfortunately, not much. It goes in the things you would expect. Vrauks. So, the next time that we're going to need this is for making the archods, and specifically making the archod nests, or in other words, corpse honey. So we'll need it for that. It's not the end of the world that this is so big, because it will support another function later, but nonetheless, it is too big. Will you at least give me credit that despite the fact that this is so huge and way bigger than it needs to be, it still works and it looks amazing? I'm trying to find ways of coping with this, and that is my cope. Is that it may be pointlessly large, but it works. But yeah, I was looking at this running, and we had our build on the production block here, and I was just looking at it, and I'm like, huh, that's weird. 0.8 per second is an awful lot smaller than 4 per second. Why is this 4 per second? And then I was like, oh, that's why. The numbers are wrong. But the build is here to stay. But anyway, the food gets delivered here, and it will get distributed on these 4 belts. So let's just hook everything up and see what happens. We still need to put the water barrels in, and also this belt is not necessary, but we at least want to make sure that everything gets placed in the machines properly and also gets sorted correctly when it makes it to the bottom. And it certainly seems like it's working. So yeah, it's waiting on the flora if it was there, because once all that biomass is gone, now the flora is going to make it in. So we just need the water barrels now. There is a chest here, it's kind of hard to see, so let's just plop it in this bottom one because we can see it. And it looks kind of funny it going in a clock pattern, but each one's getting filled up and they're starting to operate. And it's pretty fast. Meanwhile, how is our hilariously oversized rock food build going? Well, it looks like it's about hitting the limit of our moss. I don't see the caravan here, which means it actually picked up its full load, and now it's filling up again. Okay, the next part is the rock paddocks. It's going to be similar concept. 3 belts on each side. The barreling machine is going to be in the middle, and then we're going to have these 4 on the outside. Yeah, something like that I think will do it. Let's pick it up and put it in the final place. And we do want some amount of space to be between these builds in case we need it for something. So how about we do this, and will this fit? Yep, 8, 12, and 16. We only need the 15, but 16 looks cleaner. And just comparing size, you can see that our new build here is substantially shorter, and that's always nice. Man, this build is so much more dense and essentially complicated compared to what came before, but it's better, I promise. And I keep wanting to check on our build here to make sure that it's not generating a ton of biocrud, and it's starting to, because our supply of moss is getting very slow, but also it's pretty close to maxing out. Let's make sure that moss is actually going, and it isn't because of a lack of stone. Actually, we could send the stone signal onto a radar here and have a second reason for shale oil to go. The second one here is if stone is, say, how about less than 1,000, which is pretty low. If so, it can run, and of course it wants to. So that's going to take a second for stone to work its way all across the factory and where we need it, but it eventually will. Okay, let's hook everything up and see if it all gets inserted correctly. I'm actually wondering that 1,000 stone may not be enough because it takes so long for it to run. So let's add a 0 to that. But anyway, it's just waiting for the barrels, so let's see if 1 stack of barrels is enough again. There they go. It's still a long process. And yeah, the 50 was enough. There's a couple barrels left over, but I'm okay with that. So now we need to modify this whole setup to do the breeding program. And interestingly, it's done in another reproductive complex. So after making cocoons, it will get inserted again into another complex. And then after we have enough rocks, we can just make them in paddocks. And they use similar resources to this, but what this is essentially saying is we need to have more reproductive complexes, and we would want to try to max out this build if we could. So how many would we have access to? Well, assuming it was completely maxed out, we would have about our 4 cocoons, but in practice we would probably have a lot less because that assumes that everything has been upgraded. And if we did have the 4 cocoons, it would need 1.5 complexes with the better Vrauks, which tells me that we essentially just want to have 1 complex. So plopping this wherever for now, we can check the breeding program. Kind of requires a bit of a combination of both of these setups. And in the end, it's just going to be a temporary building. So let's put it in a temporary place and just run belts down to it, and then we can pick it up later. So like right here. Okay, let's see if all of this works. We put the items in, and we have our spoilage chest here. There's no point in having an official belt for it because the building is temporary. And our 50 barrels. So I like how you put 50 cocoons in, and you have a 0.5% chance of getting a Mark II Vrauk, and then a 5% chance of getting some amount of those 50 cocoons back in the form of Vrauks. So I don't know what's going on in here, but it's pretty bad. And it's not a super slow building, really, especially if you had the Mark II Vrauks in there. But the important thing is that it just needs to keep running. And there it is. It's pretty unexciting. You don't get much of anything out of it. Most of the time it's just wasting resources. Wow, that was fast. Wow. I don't know what to say. I wasn't looking exactly at the timer, but that was like a minute. And in fact, if we look at this building, 2 crafts. It completed 2 crafts, and we got a 0.5% item drop. Okay then. We need more than 1, though. I could tell you why we got it in 2 crafts. It's because I made my rock food build so big. That's why. It was the plan all along. Now this build is going to be a little bit more permanent because this is where we're going to get our Vrauks from. But nonetheless, let's just put the buildings down so we can see what the requirements are. So looking at the numbers here, we're going to need a minimum of 2 Mark II Vrauks in order to start making cocoons. We'll probably get them back, but not necessarily. And of course, the actual building needs to have Vrauks in them, although they actually don't have to be Vrauk Mark IIs, which is interesting. And we have a 95% chance of those 8 cocoons turning into a Vrauk. So we're going to need some minimum amount of them to get started. It's kind of hard to say exactly how many, probably like 5 or 10. So we're just going to let this run for a while. Well, this is going to trash the inventory, but we can pick up this old setup because we don't need it anymore. And this will be a satisfying one to remove because we'll just look at it. These other buildings here making our creatures are going to become non-functional now, but chances are they were going to move anyway, so I'm not too worried about them. We will fix it later. There we go. It's gone. And look at all of that junk. And now we essentially need to make this same build again. And will this fit? Yep, looking good. And it looks like this build has finally shut down because we've caught up on Vrauk food and we've got about 6,000 bio crud, so that's something. But this should lessen over time as throughput of various ingredients increases, so I'm fine with that. Clearly that build is way bigger than it needs to be, so now that we've built up a buffer of Vrauk food, it's basically not really going to run much anymore. Okay, most of the second build is hooked up, so let's see it operate. There we go, that should do it. It's a little wiggly, but it gets in there. And we definitely need to take the cocoons from this setup and combine them into this one, so essentially all spare cocoons will go in here. And this has been running a while and we still have just the one. So yes, we got quite lucky that one time. And actually, now that we have this Mark II Vrauk, we can put it into the reproductive complex, so it'll run just that much faster when the cocoons are available. Otherwise, it seems like it's running as well as it can. I like having the barreling machines in the middle. It's a lot cleaner looking that way, even though it was a little difficult to get all this stuff in here. So there's definitely some more supporting elements we need. Like we need to be able to chop them up a lot faster than one building's worth, and we need to be able to make a lot more latex than this, but we can wait until we basically build a creature slaughtering bus to do all of that. I just wanted to get this going now because who knows how long the Mark II version of the Vrauks is going to take, so we wanted to get this set up. That said, our production of moss seems to be going pretty good. It's basically maxed out now. And specifically that means that the logic to handle stone with Keragen seems to be working. Right now it's running low, but you see the Keragen stone is just about to get here, so what happened before should not occur again. Alright, now that we have Vrauks going, there isn't a whole lot left to do in our factory with our current research, so let's research something new. And really, the only direction at this point that we can actually go is to make laboratory equipment, which gives us access to a few things we're going to need later. We have the equipment chassis, which requires a few items, the laboratory instrument, which requires a whole bunch of rubber, but also the chassis and optical set. And the optical set is a glass item that requires molten glass and boron trioxide, and of course if we add hot air it gets a little more efficient. And then with that we have access to genetics 2, where we can make plasmids with those laboratory instruments and some other things, including Zogna bacteria, which would be our first use of that. And we can make a retrovirus with the laboratory instruments and a bunch of stuff, specifically the Vrauk cocoons. So it is a good thing that we're making more of them because just the Vrauks are starting to go into more things. And if we put everything together, this stage and also the previous one, so glassware, laboratory instrument, basic substrate, incubated petri dishes, biosample, moss gene sample, plasmids, and retrovirus, all of that makes one cDNA, which is the goal there. Because we have a new plant to make. Let's say that's the Rawlessia's custom GMO flowers. And specifically we need that cDNA in order to make them from scratch. And before we go any further, we do want to figure out how to make this cDNA. That right now we are making some related components right here. but I kind of want to change the way that the factory handles it. For example, we are making the Petri dishes right here on site, but it's not the only places that Petri dishes go. They're being made here as well. And because it's a complicated process, specifically in that it uses agar, which is a decay item, it actually kind of makes sense to make all of these in one location rather than doing it over and over again all over the place. And because we need this cDNA, but we don't know the quantities of it, it's kind of important to build a plan, because if we just do one machine into one machine, it could potentially be extremely slow. So we at least want to try to make a build that will make a known quantity of them, even though we don't really know how many we're going to want. All right, here's our cDNA plan. It's pretty complicated, so let's go through why I'm doing it this way. Because all of these are related resources, it kind of makes sense to build a central plan around them and even do them in a central area, because we don't know how much of any resource we're going to need. And if we just do one machine into one machine, we're going to find ourselves limited very quickly. And I would prefer to have a setup that will support us in the future and we won't have to just come back and build it up again. I tried to create a build that would let us do that. So the green number is the cDNA, and we're just going to go with 0.1 because that's fine. We don't need a whole bunch of this. And if you do see all products, you can click an intermediate and type a number in, and it's red because I've done that. And also the little asterisk here shows that that number was typed in, and these are additional amounts above and beyond. So for example, the cDNA requires 0.1 plasmids, but because I've typed 0.1 in here, it means we're actually going to get 0.2 plasmids. So assuming this whole thing was running, we will get a net output of all of these things. So let's go down the list. cDNA is the ultimate goal, so of course all of this needs to go into it. It's pretty complicated, and each one is kind of its own thing. And definitely spoilage and decay is going to be a part of this. So because we need incubated Petri dishes as a part of making the cDNA, they have to be right there. And I went with 0.1 because it's one machine and, you know, that seems fine. The main use of this right now is to print creatures from nothing. So it only needs to go fast enough for that to occur. But as you see by these numbers, it actually gets kind of big. The next thing is the retrovirus here, and I put most things on their own build, and that's kind of what this blue highlight is. So if we come in here, we can see the individual builds. And I didn't go through the entire build. I only took it to either base items the factory is going to have or other things that are going to be in other builds. So the retrovirus is pretty straightforward. The main thing that goes into it are the Vrauk cocoons. Also, we're going to get our 0.2 plasmids, and we're getting 0.2 retroviruses too. So we're making what we need for the cDNA and also getting another 0.1 for our own use. And that actually comes out of one incubator, so it's fine. And we're doing the same thing with plasmids, and it's going to take 1.6 buildings. But looking at the overview here, it's actually largely similar. It just requires lamps and logs. And that's because the main ingredient is this Sogna bacteria. And of course, it requires its other things, and that's fine. So coming back here, things are going to get interesting because we also need the basic substrate for cDNA. And if you remember, basic substrate goes into PyScience 1. Which means that we can combine all of our basic substrate into one part of the factory and just move it around. And whether or not you want to make something on site or move it around kind of depends. But if anything is a decay item, you're highly biased towards making it in one central location because you're just going to have to keep doing it over and over again. Like for example, we're making the Petri dishes here, which require agar, and of course we have logic for that. And the same thing occurs here as well. So you just kind of have to keep doing the same things over and over again, and it gets annoying after a while. So the advantage of a central location is that you just do it one time. And if you need more, you can just make it bigger. And looking at the requirements here, we only need 0.4 for the cDNA, and I buffed it up to a net of 2.46. That our science actually only needs 1.2. But basic substrate does go into other things eventually, so why not buff it up, especially considering it's just buffed up to one factory's worth. And these numbers are actually kind of small, so it's really not that big a deal. And there's some other things we've already made, like biosamples, and I size that just based on 15 a second, one full belt of flora. What else can you do? Even still, it's basically one assembling machine into 10, so it's a nice ratio. And then we have our moss gene samples, and of course, needs more petri dishes. And I size that based on that and the basic substrate, adding up to 15 moss a second. And again, can't really expect any more than that. And after that, now we start needing to make the supporting equipment here. So we're going to need glassware, and we might as well do that at a central location too, instead of making it every single place we need them. And I did buff this up a little bit as well, that technically our build here only needed 0.7, but I'm adding an extra 0.3 here because it does go into other things, such as our science where we needed 0.2 of it, so there'll be a tiny bit left over. And the big thing here that goes into all three of our new items is the laboratory instruments. And they're pretty easy to make as far as assembly. You just have to make these equipment chassis with a relatively small amount of resources, and then you put those into the instruments with a relatively small amount of resources. The only thing is the rubber, that this is 2.5 rubber by itself, and the whole build is actually 3.17. And that's a lot considering that right now, that even our rubber build running at full speed, which will only happen when all of our Vrauks have grown to the Vrauk 2s, will only get 1 per second. So there's no hope of this keeping up with that for a while. Eventually we will get better rubber recipes, but also I don't actually expect this build to run at full speed. I'm just trying to make it as reasonably large as I can, so in the future, if we need output, it'll exist and we won't just have to rebuild the whole thing. That said, I'm trying to limit the things which might cause issues, and that is one of them. Most of these are pretty easy to create for our factory. That one isn't, but it will get easier with time, and I am fine with that, especially considering almost half of that rubber is going into the extra retrovirus and plasmids that we're making that are otherwise not required for the cDNA. And to make those requires optical sets. It's a hydrogen and borax related item, and all these numbers are super small. This is absolutely a one machine into one machine build, and it will be easy to make. And then after all of that, we've been needing petri dishes in a whole bunch of different things. So finally, it's the petri dish build, and this is the big one that requires 16.2 machines and our 80 seaweed crop facilities and a little bit more than one belt's worth. So this will supply our factory with all of the petri dishes that we need, and instead of making it on site at all these random builds, it will be made at a central location and delivered. So looking at all the numbers here, are there any limitations? Well, our new Vrauk build will be able to make almost 4 of the cocoons, and we only need 0.8 for this. It is 1.2 steel, which is almost all of our steel, but eventually we'll get better steel. So I think this is pretty reasonable. Another big thing we won't have is this molten glass. We need 132, but right now our build is only making 45, but it's actually really easy to expand. Right now, we're getting the most out of this mine, but if we want more, all we need is another mine of this size, and then these buildings right here, and then we have more glass. It's mainly a liquid fuel issue, but it's actually quite easy to make, so I think these are reasonable numbers for our factory. Most of the time, this stuff won't actually be running. It's just going to be waiting for the day that we need to make a new creature, and then it's going to fire up. But of course, we're at that point now where we need to make a new creature. Well, a new flower anyway. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to leverage the oversized nature of our Vrauk food setup in order to make cDNA a little easier. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.